Just like that, we're live and getting set for UFC Fight Night. Dern versus Hill, something we never do with Fight Night picks. We got a big time card coming up, a lot of 8-bit and chiptune as well. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Just like that, we're back with Fight Night picks, getting set for UFC Fight Night. Dern versus Hill. As always, one half your hosting duo, Craig Allen. Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, respective socials, Matt Allen FNP. We get the 80s video game feel, getting set for a card that is something happening at the UFC's Vegas Apex coming up this weekend. 12 fights set, originally set to be Irene Aldana taking on Raquel Pennington. Juliana Pena is out of the bantamweight title fight. So all of a sudden, Raquel Pennington, who's ranked number 2, who's on a 5-fight win streak, doesn't get a title shot because a 5th-ranked fighter on a 2-fight win streak, and Irene Aldana is new blood in that picture, so she gets a shot. Pennington is, of course, the backup for that fight. And ultimately, a week away, Dern and Hill are shuffled into the main event slot. It's now 5 rounds, and we have some fights coming up this weekend, Matt.
We know some interesting fights coming up this weekend. I will say this about the main event that we will have. It's going to be an interesting fight, right? For Mackenzie Dern, her record might look really good, but each one of these losses that she has had, it's almost worse that she is losing these decisions, right? It's not like she's going out there and getting finished early where, okay, you can leave a lot of it up to chance. There is some limitations to her skill set, and Angela Hill's kind of like the other side of the coin, right? Her record's not that pristine anymore, but she is in a lot of these fights, and a lot of these fights have been close decisions that could go one way or another. So the loser of this, I feel like, is going to fall quite a bit in the division because, again, for Hill, she's had so many opportunities at the rankings, at just every fighter, basically, in the whole entire division, that you wonder how many more chances she's going to get, and if Dern doesn't look good in this one, you wonder what they're really going to do, because they've promoted her quite a bit.
This is one of the weakest cards you're going to find from the UFC. I mean, you have Hill ranked 14th right now. She's 15-12 overall. Dern is ranked much higher into the card. Zach G's hanging out over there in the chat. First, last, Business Jeremy. We've got Frank. We got Brandor, Rob Lawrence, and Colby Saul as well. Make sure you hit up the chat throughout the show and toss a like if you can. Overall, only 2 ranked fighters on this card. 12 of the 24 fighters are coming off of wins. The other 12 are coming off of losses. It is just one of those cards, and this is only the 4th time with Fight Night picks. Bellator 242, 253, and UFC Orlando, Thompson versus Holland, that we've gone live for one of these full card offerings. So overall, 12 total fights. As I said, a lot of different things to look forward to, but the fights, they are not what we are used to because the UFC is parading around a lot of Apex cards. That we have a week off after this. And then you have Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi at the Apex. It's another one of the weaker cards. And then it's a pay-per-view card.
Can I just say this, though? I'm more excited for Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana than I probably would have been for Raquel Pennington versus Amanda, too. Yeah. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense for the rankings, but again, if the rankings made sense, the number 1 contender would fight for the title every single time, not like the number 3 or 4, which is how it happens. So, again, I don't put a lot of stock in the rankings, but just for entertainment value-wise, I think Aldana versus Nunes should be a pretty good fight.
The other promotions are nipping at the UFC's heels, and if it continues this way, we're going to start covering the other promotions. Now, Matt, we throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen for this weekend, and there's a couple of fights that are really attracting our attention. We have Andrea Fialho taking on Joaquin Buckley. Buckley's first stop at welterweight in the UFC. Definitely something to look forward to. In this one, Fialho, his last 2 times out, lower than average striking output, lower than average volume numbers, accuracy and everything. And for Joaquin Buckley, went out on a shield his last time out. Bit of bad blood against Chris Curtis, the Action Man. So in this matchup, Matt, Buckley, the last time he competed at 170 was against Logan Storley, and he got held down for pretty well all 15 minutes. I don't think that's going to happen against Fialho.
No, I don't either, but it is interesting, right? Buckley famously fought Kevin Holland at 185. Kevin Holland now at 170. And it was funny, too, because Kevin Holland looked big compared to Joaquin Buckley at 185. So it does make sense for Buckley to go down to 170. Of course, I will be watching the scales and the weigh-ins to see how good he does look at the weight class. But if he can carry his power and his explosiveness down to 170, there's not going to be a lot of guys who can eat his power. So it should make for a fun fight.
Second choice here, Matt, Orion Cosce taking on Gilbert Urbina. Same weight class. And if you look at it, for Urbina coming down back to 170 pounds, same deal. He was on the Ultimate Fighter season 29, lost in the finals to Brian Battle at middleweight. He got finished finished in that one. He's taking on Orion Cosce, who missed weight his last time out, but he did get his first UFC win against Blood Diamond. He's healed up his injuries. He's taken a lot of time off. And now when it comes down to this one, I see Lord Nikon in the comments saying Cosce Urbina is such a banger. Both of these guys can offensively wrestle. Both of these guys throw out striking defense for striking offense. And that's why I think this one should deliver.
It's one of the most heavyweight, non-heavyweight fights, just because I do think we are going to get two guys who are extremely aggressive. They should be in the middle. It might get a little bit weird if it goes past the second round, just because they will throw with a lot of output. So I'll be curious to see whose gas tank wins out, because that could be a big conversation for this fight.
All right, so when it does come to this entire card, 12 total fights as of Monday night. If anything shifts from now until Saturday, you know we have Fight Night Picks question mark kicks. That one's 2 hours live before the prelims. This card is a normally timed one. It's not going to be an early one that's on ABC, so you can prepare yourself for that one. Again, you can toss a like as the show goes on. We're going to keep it short, succinct, and to the point, and we're going to rip through all 12 of the fights on the card. We have a lot of different ones to talk about, Matt. People are going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. So the first fight that's on the card, this one is do or die at 170 pounds. We have a couple of guys that aren't from the States, but they're both training in South Florida. The former Deep and Pancrase man, it is Takashi Sato. He's going to be taking on the answer, Themba Gorimbo, who we had him build his last time out in his UFC debut out of Johannesburg. That was where he was training, getting ready. We know he's originally from Zimbabwe. He found so much success, not just in life, but in mixed martial arts there in South Africa. But when you have a look at the fight here, I mean, Matt, like, for Themba Gorimbo, really struggled in that debut when he was taking on one AJ Fletcher, the Ghost. And I mean, for Fletcher, it's kind of weird because he was 0-2 in the UFC to that point. And I know the level of competition kind of all over the place, but if you look at it for AJ Fletcher, more than a 2-1 favorite at 0-2 against the debuting fighter in Themba Gorimbo. And he had a ton of success against Gorimbo. And everything that we kind of said about Gorimbo coming into the UFC pretty well played out as true in that debut. The wrestling offense was there. The wrestling defense wasn't there. The striking offense was there. The striking defense wasn't there. And in a matchup like this, Matt, against Takashi Sato, who is a second dan in judo, second dan black belt in judo, you see it out of Takashi Sato. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, hasn't won in 3 years, but Takashi Sato in every single fight is about the same. I'm southpaw, I wait, I try and land a straight left.
He's one of those fighters where if you just want to talk about his skill set, I don't have a lot of negatives to take from it, right? He does do pretty much everything in MMA to at least an acceptable level, right? It's just like you bring up. It's the output. It's kind of his ability to just kind of stand there and look in a mirror, and that's the frustrating thing for Sato. When he's throwing a lot of strikes, the strikes look great, and he's a very accurate striker from the outside, but there's a big part of me that thinks Themba can just crash the distance, get on the inside, and make it ugly for Sato, because again, he's a guy who has great technique from the outside. He does have good elbows on the inside. I'm not saying he's a 0 on the inside, but it's a place he can feel uncomfortable in, and we've seen him get cracked by some big shots. But I'm going to be curious to see who's going to win out in a lot of these longer range striking exchanges, because for Sato, he does have kicks on his side, but it comes down to, like you had brought up, is he going to use them? Because if he just stands there with a lot of wasted movement with nothing behind his punches, I could see a world where Themba comes in and does get the win. But I agree with everything you said. You kind of do have to go back and look at our preview for Themba's UFC debut, because we were quite critical on him, and he did lose to AJ Fletcher, who has kind of looked okay even in some of his losses, to be completely fair to Fletcher. I just feel like, for me, my initial reaction was, A, Sato's 6 years older than him, but I also think he's going to win. And then they're the same age, and the more I thought about it, the more I do hate it how every time I think about Takashi Sato, it's, hey, I think about all the things he could be doing more of, and I think less about the positives in his skill set.
And that's kind of the thing. Like, a lot of blitzes out of a guy like Themba Gorimbo, to where Takashi Sato is going to try and gauge that and land counters off of those blitzes. And we've seen it from Sato. I mean, he could have got the opportunity to come into the UFC. He fought for the Pancrase title against Glyco Franca, who only had the 3 fights in the UFC after winning the Ultimate Fighter. He loses that fight in the 4th round by submission. Then he goes out there his next time out. Main events the next Pancrase show against Matt Vale. And in that one, Vale blitzes forward. Takashi lands that straight left shot, ends up dropping Vale, and then it's Sato into the UFC. And if you look at the wins that Sato has in the UFC, he finishes Ben Saunders, who was on a streak to losing 4 fights in a row and getting out of the UFC. His other win is against Jason Witt. What does he land? that straight left and finishes them. And the losses are against decent fighters. But again, if you blitz Takashi Sato, you have a big opportunity to get finished. Over in the comment section, Dirty Reg, both guys are bad here, but I got to side with Gorimbo. And for Gorimbo, former EFC lightweight title challenger, former EFC welterweight champ. If we do have a look, Matt, at Tapology for the total votes on this one, surprise us there to you. They're pick'em odds in this one. I'm going to say over under 60% for the answer, Frankie Edgar, Themba Gorimbo.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under? It's over. So 918 total votes, 65% Gorimbo, 35% by decision, 47% by knockout for the 35% that have Sato, 51% by decision, 38% by knockout. And I see it there too by Chandler Witt saying a lot of fights on this card are going to be 50-50. When it does come down to this fight, Matt, I mean, Themba Gorimbo has switched things up. I know I talked about the training. He's now at MMA Masters, training with Colby Covington. He posts oddly worded tweets on his Twitter account, which is just, yeah, it is what it is. But when it does come to Themba Gorimbo, my favorite thing about him, you go to the UFC.com Q&A section, the question, when and why did you start fighting? The answer, in 2010 after watching the movie Never Back Down. Was he a big fan of Amber Heard, do you think?
How many Monster Energies does this guy drink? Like, he sounds like the stereotype of every guy outside of a Buffalo Wild Wings.
Takashi Sato is on a terrible run. I think he counters Themba Gorimbo and beats him by knockout in this fight.
I think he's going to have a lot of opportunities too, but I'm going to zag a little bit. I have Gorimbo because I think he's going to make him pay before he's going to be able to land those counters. I don't discredit anything you said. I agree with your method of him winning. I do think those counters are going to be available. I just think it's going to take him a couple more half steps to really set those counters up, and I think Themba can make him pay on the in-betweens. Now, if I get this one wrong, I'm not going to feel that stupid, though. I have this very much down the middle. It's a very close fight.
It should be a very interesting fight. Split on the pick in this one. Themba Gorimbo taking on Takashi Sato. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Next up, Matt, it's Natalia Silva taking on Victoria Leonardo. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The most lopsided fight on the entire card. I mean, we have Natalia Silva taking on Victoria Leonardo, and I say lopsided, but that's in terms of the odds. When you look at it in terms of the overall hierarchy in this division, both of these women on win streaks, both of them looking to move forward. Victoria Leonardo, her last time out, no illegal strikes. She beat Mandy Byrne. The judges were in it, but all three of them scored at 30-27. Leonardo in that matchup. She pressured well. She mixed in her combination. She looked like a complete package type of fighter in that one. Take on Natalia Silva, who was about a plus 200 in her debut against Jasmine Jasudavicius. Now, the craziest part about this is she fought Jasudavicius last year. That's when Natalia Silva made the debut. After a 2.5-year layoff, you're going to go, why? Because she was the Jungle Fights champ before that. Yes, she was. Silva was supposed to make her debut in 2021 against Victoria Leonardo. Broke the ulna. Then we had the long layoff. Leonardo ends up in the UFC, loses her first two, and now we're here. But the way that Silva looked in that fight against Jasudavicius, defended all the takedowns, lit her up on the feet. You look at her last time out against Teresa Bleda. What's Bleda going to do if she's going to win? Take you down over and over and over again. She wasn't able to get the takedown, and as that fight went on, Silva's output went up. Silva was able to really start to land the kicks to the body. That was ultimately the demise of Bleda. But you saw it out of Silva. 1, 2, 3. Finish every combination with a kick, and Silva had a lot of success in those striking areas. And
she showed an ability to upgrade fight between fight. And I do think that's important for a fighter who's still only 26 years old, because I do think there's still some room for improvement, even though she does have a very good foundational skill set built up already.
Man, I mean, Natalia Silva training with Paulo Costa, Team Baracha, with Carlos being the head coach there. But you look at somebody like Natalia Silva, you consider the background of both of these women. I mean, for Victoria Leonardo, she does have jiu-jitsu in her back pocket. She's somebody that spends a lot of time in the gym. Obviously, Brett Mason being her husband, owning the gym at Elite Combat, that's a big, big deal. But training with people like Andrea Lee down in that kind of Louisiana region, you look at a matchup like this, and I know a lot of people are going to count Victoria Leonardo out because we've seen those two pressure fighters that Silva's faced in the UFC, maybe even at a little bit of a higher level, kind of struggle against some of her striking. So it is a tough ask for Leonardo in this one. But Leonardo, to her credit, the strength of schedule is definitely there for her in a matchup like this.
It is. Do you want me to give the pick now, or do you want to do the Tapology bit?
No, I mean, I did see today out there on Twitter, Silva's a minus 1,000 favorite. So there's not much to it.
No, exactly. Again, you'd like to give a more complete breakdown. But again, when you just think about both fighters' skill sets, Leonardo has gotten better, but she's not nearly as diverse of a striker. She doesn't really have the output going for her either. So if Silva is able to start getting downhill, gaining momentum with her strikes, what does Leonardo have to do to really be able to stop that momentum? That's what this fight's going to come down to. For me personally, I just think the numbers of Silva are far going to outweigh whatever Leonardo can bring to her on the feet. Now, Leonardo might be able to counteract some of that with some clinch work. She's a very physical fighter, a very big fighter too, so I think she could wear on Silva and maybe equal out that power bar as this fight does continue. But again, if it comes down to output, I definitely like Silva in the matchup.
I mean, Leonardo, 2016 IKF Muay Thai belt. To her credit, she's got a Kung Fu background and a purple belt in BJJ. Was also a high school Spanish teacher before she got into the UFC. Some fun stuff there. But when you do look at it, I mean, Taekwondo is the background of Silva. That kind of lends credence to those kicks that you see on the outside. And I know her last time against Bleda, 120 to 40 were the total strikes in that matchup. She defended 6 of 7 Bleda takedowns. When I do look at it, I know Megadan saying the odds don't really reflect how much better Silva is, but when you do consider it, like minus 1,000 is juice, so I consider it a little bit of a pop and popcorn matchup myself. But I do like Natalia Silva in the in-betweens in this matchup. Again, if it was the Silva that we saw with Jungle Fights before she won the belt, her striking didn't really mix with her grappling. She left big openings on the feet, but we haven't necessarily seen that in the UFC, and Silva's been able to beat similarly styled fighters, I guess. So for me, I do have Natalia Silva in the matchup. It might not come as a giant success, but yeah, I going with Silva in this one.
Yeah, got Silva. It's a pretty easy pick.
All right, Matt. Both of us going with Natalia Silva in this matchup. The next fight on the card, a couple of guys who are short on pro experience and they've tasted defeat recently. It's Chase Hooper taking on Nick Fiore. So if you thought that Takashi Sato, who's on a 3-fight losing streak, taking on Themba Gorimbo, who's lost 1 in the UFC, I said that was a do-or-die fight at welterweight. I think even if Gorimbo loses 2, that's it. When I look at this fight, Matt, this is do or die, and Nick Fiore's in the same circumstance. I mean, he did just make his pro debut on incredibly short notice, taking on Mateusz Rebecki. Now that was both of their debuts, and Fiore, for what it was worth, taking that fight, and I want to make sure that I get it right. Like, that was really, really, really short notice when he took on Rebecki. But, I mean, you consider the matchup there. Fiore was a lot bigger in the fight. You had a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup, and Fiore burnt really hot in the first 2.5 minutes of the first round. And then he kind of petered off. But it didn't look like the Fiore that we knew, that we saw in the regional scene. And that's kind of the thing about Nick Fiore. Nick Fiore's one of those guys that had to beat Jay Ellis twice on the regional scene, fought all of his pro fights on the regional scene with Combat Zone, which is his teammate Calvin Cater's promotion. And the craziest part about the Nick Fiore fight against Mateusz Rebecki was the commentary team didn't watch any of his previous fights because he kept saying, why isn't he throwing the jab like all of his teammates at the New England Cartel? Because you silly fools, he doesn't throw the jab. He's he's a BJJ black belt out of Henzo Gracie, New Hampshire. And if you watch any of the tape on the regional scene, Fiore throws big bombs to close the distance, to get a double leg, to get you down, to roll you onto your back, and either get the rear naked choke or try and go for TKO.
But that's why this is one of those fights where it's like, okay, Chase, if you don't win this, I don't really know where we're going. And it has been a disservice to the career of Chase Hooper up until this point because he was a young prospect who got pushed too early. And the problem is, in pro MMA, like, once you go pro and make it to the UFC, you can't, like, go back and get a bunch of amateur fights. Like, you are a big name. You're going to kind of get feasted on these bigger events. So, for Hooper, even though I do feel like he has made improvements, and that's the problem, he was so green when he started out against brother of David Tamer, Daniel Tamer, that he's still, the positives are there, right? Like, he's more of a machete than he is a Swiss Army knife. His strength is the grappling. He's going to want to get you down. He's a heavy presence on top, and you can tell that just by looking at him. We have it here. He's 6'1" for the division. He's huge. He looks like he could be 7'1". He is in the build of a Cole Miller type. So for Hooper, it just would be nice if he could kind of do the Brian Ortega progression of skill sets, right? It goes, be deadly with your jiu-jitsu, then add the boxing, and then add the counters to your boxing, add elbows. Now, I know that took him years to do, and he had a layoff. It might have been due to USADA and drug step, but that doesn't matter. You just know that he was able to take the time off, make the improvements, and that's what matters over time. For Hooper, he's been able to make those improvements. It's just, again, if you can't beat Nick Fiore in this fight, what are we doing? Because I do think the grappling of Nick is going to make this a difficult matchup. Like, Hooper has a grappling advantage in a lot of these MMA matches he is in, but he probably will still have it in this one. Let's be fair. Chase Hooper gets the top position in this fight. He has good ground and pound. He does have good durability for a grappler. I think he can make this a very difficult fight, but if Nick was able to match him on the mat, I wouldn't be completely surprised whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, you see Nick Fiore as recently as 2021 really competing in a lot of grappling jiu-jitsu tournaments. I mean, Enigma grand opening BJJ champ. Enigma. Nick Fiore. But when you do look at it, I mean, Fiore's definitely one of those kill or be killed type of strikers. Chase Hooper, so many people in our comment section were excited when he's been training out of Upstate Karate for some of these recent matchups, but his striking didn't progress, or he tried the Chrome Gracie of, I'm just going to go out there and strike like he did against Cub Swanson, and Hooper really struggled against Steve Garcia's last time out. Got dropped 3 times, TKO standing, and I mean, so for Hooper, getting ready for this one, you can see it there on the screen, training back at home in Washington State at Combat Sport and Fitness, and if you do look at it for Chase Hooper, 3-3 in the UFC so far. Super chat from Pablo Zaragoza saying, how excited are you for Tough 31? You're watching, right? Matt's not excited at all, and I haven't even chatted with him about it. I'm kind of excited.
The Ultimate Fighter hasn't produced great fighters as of late. That's just, like even the winners, I think it's fair to say they haven't met these crazy expectations.
But when it does come down to it, again, both guys are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aces. Fiore took that fight on a couple weeks' notice. Rambeshki would have beaten Chase Hooper more easily, I think, than Fiore, who came in on 2 weeks' notice. But again, this fight is at lightweight. It's not at featherweight. So Chase Hooper coming up to 155.
I still think he's going to be big, though.
This is his first UFC contest at lightweight. He was 4-0 to start his pro career there, was Chase Hooper. 5-0 as an amateur at 155 was Chase Hooper. So it is a very interesting fight that way. But again, when it does come to Fiore, the combined opponent record of the pros that he faced before he came into the UFC, 61-234. He was not beating good fighters.
Shayless makes up a lot of that.
So when we have a look at this one, Matt, we're going to throw it on over to Tapology. Hooper versus Fiore. The odds on this one, Chase Hooper, slight favorite, but they're basically at par. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Matt, surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 70% for the dream, Chase Hooper.
I'll say under, but I think it'll be the favorite.
It is under. 966 total votes, 62% Hooper, 23% by decision, 68% by submission. For the 38% that have Fiore, 48% by knockout. Like to hear from the commenters here. I mean, fresh gamble saying Hooper does have a TKO, to be fair. And Buffo the Beast is saying, how dare you slander Juliana Miller, the tough champ. Bob Collins watched tape last night on this fight. Fiore is a... We don't say that word here.
That's like Voldemort around here.
That is a tough word here. For the fans that are listening on the pod version, which is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, we're not saying what you turn on your door before you go to bed to keep the baddies out. But Matt, when it does come down to this matchup,
I've got Chase Hooper. I don't love the pick, honestly. I just think the top pressure is going to be a big enough key. I think it can secure moments and secure minutes in that position. So if it doesn't end inside the distance, and either guy could go out there and get a submission win, I can fully admit that. But I just think if it goes to a decision, I can see Hooper being in the more dominant positions on the mat. And for that reason, I do favor him ever so slightly in the matchup.
Chase Hooper's record is what it is at this point. I mean, you've seen it earlier.
I don't think either guy's fighting for a UFC title.
No, and I was not that hyped on Nick Fiore coming into the UFC because he's not like anybody else at the New England cartel. He's more like Joe Lozon, but even Joe Lozon has basic boxing combinations, then get his wrestling going.
Surprising pop.
Nick Fiore has decent wrestling from what I've seen against lesser levels of competition, and he took Mateusz Rambesky by surprise and took him down in that matchup, a guy that trains at ATT with some of the best. Chase Hooper doesn't have the wrestling entries that Nick Fiore has, but he does have the scramble ability. For me, I think Nick Fiore's going to be the bigger fighter in this one at 155. I could be wrong on that one, but like how Steven Peterson was able to stay on top and control Chase Hooper for large periods of time, I think Nick Fiore can do the same. So for me, I'm going with Nick Fiore. Matt's going with Chase Hooper. But yeah, again, let us know who you have down there below in the comments section. Next fight coming up on this card, it's a doozy. Ilir Latifi main evented his debut against Gegard Mousasi. He's taking on Rodrigo and Nascimento next. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. So when it comes to all-time great nicknames, we have the Sledgehammer versus Zay Colmea, which roughly translates to the Beehive. What's that about?
Bzz.
Matt,
Ilir Latifi is an expert in many animals across the world. I just assumed he had retired off to some foreign beach onto a horse with a beautiful view. Like, I thought Ilir Latifi had his whole life figured out.
because he decided to talk about having staff, like, in front of everybody. I never thought they'd have him back.
Yeah, like, I just kind of thought that was it for Ilir. He's 40 years old and he's had a lot of fights.
He 30-27 on all judges' scorecards. 45-year-old Alexei Oleinik is last time out, with striking on the outside.
And that's been the thing. For Ilir Latifi, we have seen an increased number of 205ers make the transition up to heavyweight. Honestly, kind of vice versa, right? We're seeing some heavyweights go down to 205. Chris Daukaus being one who's making that transition sooner rather than later. But Latifi has had a decent amount of success. Because here's the thing. What was his X factor at 205? His physicality. The man is as strong as an ox. Like, Ilir Latifi really does have that X factor of strength. Remember the takedowns that he was landing on Tyson Pedro? He was lifting him up over his head, slamming him. Like, Ilir Latifi is a very talented and a very physical wrestler when he is able to fight at his own pace and really on his own terms. But the problem is, for a lot of these 205ers, when they move up to heavyweight, well, they're not really able to outmuscle anybody, right? Like, Ovince St. Preux is a big guy at heavyweight, but he doesn't really have the clinch ability at heavyweight, right? Other guys are able to outmuscle him. Ilir Latifi can still throw people on the ground, even though he isn't as big. And it is odd, because at 40 years of age, I assumed he'd have a back like Clayton Kershaw at this point, right? Like, he's just lifting and slamming and lifting and slamming. But Latifi, I do think, has been able to make the transition, at least with his skill set. He still fights very much like the fighter that he was at 205, moving up to heavyweight.
Got into MMA because of his brother, got into the UFC because of Alexander Gustafsson, but when you do look at it for Ilir Latifi, you want the Cole's notes in his career. The chat seems to be going wild over the whole retirement thing out of Ilir Latifi after he beat Alexei Oleinik. Came into the UFC on a few weeks' notice. Oh, no, it was a few days' notice in a 3-round main event replacing Alexander Gustafsson against Gegard Mousasi. Did he win that fight, Matt?
No, he got 30-27.
He got 30-27 in that one. His pro debut is a no
Who
contest.
made the debut on that card, Craig? Conor McGregor made his UFC debut on that card.
It was a card in Sweden. If you look at it for Latifi, pro debut against Blagoy Ivanov, he went to take him down, pushed him up against the ropes. The ring collapsed like it was a WWE house show. So for Latifi, all the way through 2005, Swedish Greco-Roman bronze medalist in wrestling. And that is the base. Now, he's definitely added to the hands as things have gone on. The circle of OSP and Tanner Bozers between everyone, it's definitely there. Latifi has a performance bonus over OSP at 205. He was ranked as high as 5 in the UFC's light heavyweight division going into UFC 232 against, there's levels to this, Beast in 25-8, Corey Anderson. Lost that fight. And then Latifi debuted, unranked, against number 6 Derek Lewis at heavyweight at UFC 247 and gave a good account of himself in that fight. Now, since then, Latifi hasn't looked all that hot, and when you look at it for Nascimento, the one loss, the no contest, Ritalinic acid being the issue, that was overturned by USADA, but the no contest wasn't overturned back to a win. So Nascimento kind of got screwed in that respect, but when you look at it for Nascimento, 6 wins by submission. What does he do when it's on the feet? And I know I talked about this before. You talk Chris Daukaus, you thought Nascimento was going to roll over him. That's his only pro loss. Other than that, Nascimento gets it done with the hands, backs you up, softens you up, and then once the fight goes down to the mat, his jiu-jitsu can really carry him.
And that's what I do think is the big difference between Latifi's last few opponents and Nascimento at heavyweight. I don't think a 40-year-old Latifi's lifting Nascimento up over his head and slamming him. Like, he might get a trip takedown. He does have good takedowns, but my issue with Latifi is when he throws straight shots, which are his power shots for the most part, he takes a very long time to recoil them. Like, the Corey Anderson fight against Latifi really made Corey Anderson look like a world beater because he went in there, landed good boxing combinations, was able to evade some of the more basic striking of Latifi. I just think for Latifi, I know I spent the first 3 minutes of this saying how he fights a lot more like he used to at heavyweight, but if he fights like that, I just don't think this is a favorable matchup for him at all.
I think that Latifi has a good camp going into this one. It's the second one at Extreme Couture, so maybe he wants to wait bait on the outside. The only time we've seen Nascimento in real trouble, other than where he got finished by Daukaus, was the first round against I mean, Superman, it was Alain Baudot. He looked amazing with the hands. And then in the second round, Nascimento was able to catch him. I don't exactly know what the odds or the Tapology votes are going to be in this one. We have a look over on Tapology. Nascimento is a slight favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise us there to you. I'm going to say over under 65% for Zekolnea.
I think they'll be over.
I think they're going to be over. They are over. 982 total votes. 71% Nascimento. 66% by decision for the 29% that have Latifi. 76% by decision. Matt, Dirty Reg in the comments saying Latifi will make it really boring.
And I think he's right. And I do think that's going to be Latifi's game plan. I think we're going to see a lot of clinch control, or at least attempted clinch control. I think we're going to see a lot of attempted takedowns. But Nascimento is not an easy guy to take down. It's not like he's a zero grappler. He is a very good grappler. And he does have good boxing combinations from the outside. I think that's going to be the real key. If he is able to use the jab and kind of paw away at Latifi, Latifi doesn't have a lot. Like, he doesn't throw kicks. He has good power shots, don't get me wrong, down the middle. But again, they're very basic. They are quite telegraphed. So unless Latifi can land the one big power shot or go for a high volume of takedowns, which I just don't believe he can do at 40 years of age, that's why I have Nascimento in this one.
I also have Nascimento in the matchup. I think it's just a zippy 1-2, and he can mix in his power with those popping shots. ATT being the gym for Nascimento, getting ready for this matchup, and many others. A lot of great heavyweights there in the stable. And yeah, I mean, you talk about stables, horses, and riding off into the sunset. We'll see how it makes out for
I'm
Ilir
terrified
Latifi.
of horses. I don't like them at all.
No, they're freaky. Matt, both of us going with Nascimento in the matchup. Next fight on the card, a possible fight of the night at welterweight. We got Orion Cosce taking on Gilbert Urbina. So for Orion Cosce getting ready for the matchup, he's taking on Gilbert Urbina. This is the but why fight of this weekend, and I can't overlay it with Ryan Reynolds because we're doing it live. But when you do look at this fight, Matt, Orion Cosce comes into the UFC, blows his load in the first round of his debut, gets finished in the second round against Phil Rowe, Philly Fresh. His next time out, he fights Blood Diamond. He puts pedal to the metal. He gets a lot of takedowns after the first round, and Cosce ends up winning. Now, he misses weight, and you can see that on screen at 172.5, but where I don't have asterisks on both of these guys, Gilbert Urbina is moving back down to welterweight, and he's had welterweight fights in the past. He was on the Ultimate Fighter Season 29 finale because Tresean Gore got hurt, and that's the weird part about it. Gilbert Urbina got finished by Tresean Gore. He got dropped 3 times in the first round. He got finished in the second round. And then on, what was it? It was like 10 days notice, and I'll make sure that I get the amount of days right, but it was on 10 days notice. He ended up fighting Brian Battle. Had a pretty good first round.
He did.
And then in the second round, his own wrestling gets him in trouble that ends up getting him submitted in that matchup. So Gilbert Urbina, the last time he fought was that Ultimate Fighter finale in 2021. It's been about a year and a half since we've seen Urbina. Now, I mentioned this last week on Question Mark Kicks. Gilbert Urbina for this one, training out of, and this is the power of doing this one live, Fight Capital Gym with John Ballgame. John Ballgame. That's the coach out of that gym. He was the coach for one Douglas Silva de Andrade, who beat Cody Stamann.
Close fight.
First round controversial, but if you look at it for Gilbert Urbina, he's a guy that had trained in the past at Jackson Wink at the BMF ranch with Donald Cerrone. And when you look at Urbina, there's a lot of fighters on this card that fight like Gilbert Urbina. Good wrestling offense, not good wrestling defense. Good striking offense, not good striking defense.
Is it a hot take? I think Gilbert Urbina is going to look good in this matchup. And you don't want to start the pick that way, but at least let me explain myself from here. I just think he throws a higher variety of strikes. I think that's going to be really important, especially in the early goings of this fight. Because what do we know about Cosce? He's going to go forward. And he's going to throw some big shots. And I do think it does come down to how are you going to counter those shots on the back foot. Now, I don't think Urbina is going to fight like Caitlin Chukagian by any means. I don't think we're going to get a ha-ha and a lot of backwards movement. But I do think his kicks are going to be a big X factor. I think there's something that can land on Cosce as he's moving forward. But this is one of those fights where, again, I feel like I'm going to look stupid no matter what I say. If I say Urbina is going to outclass him on the feet, look a little bit better, maybe get a finish, then Cosce's going to march forward and get a knockout. And if I say Cosce's going to march forward and get a knockout, he's probably going to get outclassed. Just this is a fight where it's kind of like a G League All-Star game. You know, like, they're going to look good. You just don't know where their ceiling is overall.
Yeah, I mean, could you end up going into the NBA like McClung and winning a dunk contest?
And not playing? Yeah, you could.
You could. When I do look at this one, Matt, for Gilbert Urbina, 5 fights at welterweight in his career. And even if you look at it at LFA 7 when he moved up to middleweight, he weighed 179.5. So not a giant guy for middleweight. But the weirdest part about it for Urbina is he's got a big frame for middleweight, so it's kind of strange to me that he's moving down in weight. You think chin would get better as you're bigger, but now we're where we're at. For Gilbert Urbina, when you do look at it for Urbina, he loses to Brian Battle by getting submitted. Well, Battle, I mean, looked bad against Fakradina, but now all of a sudden he's
in
the
wrong
hotness.
weight class, though.
And if you have a look at the fight that he had against Trayshawn Gore, he got outstruck as Tiki goes and just kept yelling, "Go to the right! Go to the right!" So that was a fun one to go back and watch. And then I went back and I watched, well, quite a few Gilbert Urbina fights, but the Sean Brady fight is a lot like Joaquin Buckley when he fought Logan Storley. Sean Brady was a lot better than Gilbert Urbina. When it was standing, Urbina looked pretty good, but every other minute of that fight was Sean Brady out-grappling him. If Urbina's going out there and grappling, like he did at LFA 7, he's getting the takedowns, getting the back, and threatening with submission. So when you do look at this one, it is interesting. I listened to an interview that Orion Cosce did with JHK, the All-Star MMA. I wanted to do that because for Cosce, the interviews, they're all over the place. Like, he talked about it after he made the UFC debut, all kinds of injuries, numbness in his neck and his arm, getting ready for this one. He's taken a lot of time off. He's really healed and taken a lot of rest days to get ready for this matchup. Training with that team that he has with the boxing coach that is Ezra Reagan, who's at a corner Muay Thai in the UFC gym Rockland. We've seen Orion Cosce out of Team Alpha Male before, but this was the quotable that I got out of Orion Cosce. You're going to like this one. Use my striking to set up my grappling, whether it be on the ground or against the cage. It's 4-dimensional. We're not doing 3-dimensional. We're doing 4-dimensional. So apparently, Orion Cosce understands vector mathematics, and he's going to equate length and angle into his MMA fighting in the 4th dimension.
I've got Gilbert Urbina in the matchup.
Yeah, I have Gilbert Urbina in the fight as well. When I do look at this one, Matt, I think Gilbert Urbina, obviously the threat of the
Right, for God's sake, does serious back injuries get fixed by just rest days?
I don't know, but what I do know out of this one is Orion Cosce has a very powerful right hand, and if he's able to land on Gilbert Urbina, Urbina likes to drop that left as he's moving around, and sometimes he backs up, hands come down, and his head's on the center line. You will see Urbina struggling quite a bit in some of those exchanges, but to me, I mean, you got Hector, you got Elias, and you got Gilbert. So if you do look at it, the RGV Bad Boy is the longest nickname, I think, in the UFC. The Rio Grande Valley Bad Boy, Gilbert Urbina, he is the underdog in the matchup. Cosce is the favorite. We have a look at the Tapology votes. 76% have Orion Cosce to get the wins.
And he has a game plan and a path to victory. There's no doubt about it. Again, the aggressiveness, the power punching, those are all things that could work in this matchup. Again, I just think Urbina is also going to make him pay for the things that could give Cosce success.
We'll see it. I mean, Gilbert Urbina likes to switch stances a lot. Southpaws the kicks, orthodox the boxing, like Charles Jourdain. But when it does come down to this one, I'm going with the man that likes to throw the double up, triple up jab in Gilbert Urbina. Let us know who you have in the matchup. This could be a possible fight of the night at welterweight. The next one on the docket, Kowalkiewicz taking on Demopoulos. You're not going to want to miss it. Win streaks are on the line at strawweight. We have the former title challenger, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, taking on the former champ over with the LFA. It is little monster Vanessa Demopoulos. Demopoulos, after her last win, she knocked down Maria Oliveira in the 2nd round. And then in the 3rd round, she was very tired, and Oliveira was able to land a lot of shots and almost finished her in the last minute. Demopoulos, right after that, plucked it out of Fight Ready and dropped down in Factory X. So she's been training at Factory X since January to get ready for this matchup. Hopefully the cardio improved as it goes on, because you know Kowalkiewicz is one of those fighters that can really keep it going as it goes.
Steady.
But like I said, win streaks are on the line in this matchup.
I hope we don't see a grappling-heavy version of Karolina, because she has started to fade toward that as her career has extended. Because, again, she's not really the elbow queen type of fighter that she once was when she fought for the title, or even right after she fought for the title. Remember that crazy fight against Felice Herrig where she just got her in the Muay Thai clinch and threw elbows for basically 15 straight minutes? We don't necessarily see that version of her anymore, and she has implemented a lot more grappling into her fights. I'm not saying she's going to go out there and just start shooting double legs like she's Chael Sonnen, but if she does find herself in the clinch and not as aggressive with her striking, maybe just holding into some positions, that's going to give Demopoulos the opportunity to go in there and go for some of those weird kind of clinch trips and whatnot. Because Demopoulos, again, she's not going to look like Chael out there either. It's not going to be a lot of big double legs, single legs. She's going to go for a lot of unorthodox takedown attempts. That's why, of course, the clinch is probably going to be the most important position in this fight of any fight on this whole entire card, because Karolina makes you pay for it with elbows, whereas Vanessa is going to go for a lot of her own takedown attempts out of that position. So whoever's winning the clinch is more likely going to win the fight.
I don't know if I've ever picked Karolina Kowalkiewicz to win a fight on this entire channel.
Really?
And when I look at Kowalkiewicz taking on Demopoulos, better grappler. She throws a lot more power out there in her strikes, not necessarily landing a lot of those power shots. And Karolina likes to pick and pop some of those power shots in there. And Karolina, kind of like Gilbert Urbina, pop, 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 pop. She'll throw that jab out there, throw that jab, mix in the right hand. Then she'll go to the body with some of her shots too. She likes to mix it up body head quite a bit, which is what you have in Angela Hill, who's fighting Mackenzie Dern in the main event on this one. But I was going to say, what's the weirdest thing I could say about the fight other than I never picked Karolina Kowalkiewicz in this one? In 2010, Scrabble appended their rules for names, so now you can use names in Scrabble. Who has the bigger Scrabble score with their names, Karolina Kowalkiewicz or Vanessa Demopoulos?
Karolina.
Karolina has a Scrabble score of 49. Demopoulos only 25. Very long names.
I think it was close.
Different
There's
Scrabble
a Z
scores.
in one of them.
When I do look at this, Matt, I mean, for Kowalkiewicz, 7-7 in the UFC. A fight of the night was a split decision against Rose Namajunas, where she earned the title shot and then got lit up in that one. For Vanessa Demopoulos, 3-1 in the UFC so far.
Joanna looked okay.
A performance of the night bonus over one Silvana Gomez Juarez, where she got dropped and then she got the submission victory. She has a win over Sam Hughes, you really like to see. But again, when you do look at this one, you got to watch out for that overhand right out of Demopoulos, and she'll really step in with a lot of that power in these mix-ups here.
I just don't think she's Jessica Andrade, though. And, that's the type of fighter and that's the type of power you really need to hurt someone like Kowalkiewicz on the feet, unless you do have overwhelming output like a lot of these other opponents do. So I could see a world where Vanessa Demopoulos can mix all of her martial arts to the extreme, but I still do favor Karolina in the matchup. Again, I don't think she's going to get herself back to the title. She's 37 years old. She is probably past her prime in all likelihood. You bring up 7-7, got to a title shot early in her career, so a lot of those losses have come as of late. But again, I do like her output on the feet. I think she can make Vanessa pay in a lot of those clinch situations.
I mean, Karolina looks poised to go back on a title run. Maybe Takashi Sato could do that, because Kowalkiewicz had that 4-fight losing streak.
She looked terrible.
Now she's on the way back, and Sato on a 3-fight losing streak that's also on this card. Kowalkiewicz, 75% takedown defense in the UFC. Namajunas, Yan Xiaonan, and who else? I guess Gedalia had success against her.
Well,
Gedalia
she choked her out.
Got the submission early on in that matchup. You have a look at the odds. Kowalkiewicz is the slight favorite, -150. Demopoulos, slight underdog. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise test there to you. I'm going to say over-under. I think it's going to be close. Over-under 65% Kowalkiewicz.
I think it'll be over.
And it's not. It's under. 972 total votes. That's funny. 54% Kowalkiewicz, 92% by decision for the 46% that have Demopoulos, 77% by decision. And when you look at Kowalkiewicz, when she was able to, or when she was taking on Penne, accepted the fight down to the mat, got submitted. Wash saying, these guys love to play both sides, LOL. That's the point of the show. We like to give the fighters the credit they deserve and not bash them and then tag them on Twitter like other shows will do. But when I look at a matchup like this, Matt, what I do like out of Kowalkiewicz, going back and watching some of the tape, Jody Esquibel, size-wise and striking-wise, is a lot like Vanessa Demopoulos, and I know Esquibel took that fight on short notice. Also, Kowalkiewicz was ranked in the top 5 at that point, but when Esquibel was in those resets and going for those power shots, Kowalkiewicz was able to time a lot of her counters. Now, she's much older than she was then, but I still do like some of the speed that I've seen out of Kowalkiewicz and the fact that she's still been able to string some of those conversations together. So for those reasons, I will go with Kowalkiewicz in the matchup for one of the first times in the channel's history.
Yeah, I've also got Karolina.
Both of us going with Kowalkiewicz in the matchup, Matt. The next one on the card, a couple of lightweights that really need wins. We have Maheshate taking on Slava Borshchev. You're not going to want to miss it. Lightweight strikers meet in the small cage. It's the UFC's Apex. And Matt, for Maheshate, he's looked pretty darn good in the UFC's Apex. I mean, he came in taking on Achilles Estremadura, the Canadian. And he got rocked around a bit at the start of that one. And he ended up pulling out the win. He was a giant underdog. Dana White alluded to it as much. Very young man. And they signed him into the UFC. He's an underdog against Steve Garcia. Goes out there, doubling up on the same shot and dropping Steve Garcia. But his last time out against his second Garcia in consecutive fights, Rafa, Rafa Garcia's pretty good, and Rafa was able to mix in the takedowns, beating Maheshate. Maheshate's not going to have to worry about the threat of the takedown, and neither is Slaviclaus. That's the part that he struggles in, and you know that Slaviclaus, he's got the boxing experience as a pro. He's a K1 champ, 2010, 2011, 15-2 pro kickboxing record. Coming on to Dana White's Contender Series, Slava Borshchev, not the greatest level of competition.
No.
Beats Chris Duncan with that crazy knockout, and then we're off to the races. Now, for Slaviclaus, he gets taken down by Harry Dakota Bush, but he drops him. And then his last 2 times out, he gets taken down so much. So much. So where Borshchev got hit and rocked in some of his early fights as a pro, I know Kenley St. Louis was 3-3 at the time that they fought. But Kenley is now 9-4, and he's a PFL fighter, and he's really improved his career. When I look at this matchup, both of these guys struggle with takedowns, and both these guys are pretty good strikers, although they will give one to take one.
And that's the concerning thing about this fight. For Borshchev, it is interesting because he can have success on the back foot with his striking style. He's someone who will square himself up, which is normally seen as a negative. And don't get me wrong, he will eat shots as a result, but offensively, he does make guys pay for moving forward on him without really kind of being defensively sound. So Maheshate, this is a weird fight, honestly, because whoever has kind of the confidence early and success early, it could lead to their downfall, because if you start to strike in a reckless way, the opponent in both sides is going to be able to make you pay. Now, for Borshchev, we saw it in the Bush fight. He was able to go to the body and finish him with that beautiful left hook. It's a technique he does use quite a bit. I'll be curious to see just how much the body shots do factor into this fight, because if he's going to the body a lot in Maheshate, especially early on in this fight, it's water in the basement, to quote Teddy Atlas. So if it does start to slow Maheshate down, I could see Slava Borshchev being able to land some more crisp power shots. But the defensive liabilities that Slava has shown throughout basically all of his career are quite concerning. A, will it always result in a really fun fight? Yes. But B, you're always going to worry he's going to lose to basically everybody. Coming out Contender Series in the top 15, no matter where he is in his career, you're always going to have that little bit of a concern just because of how reckless a fighter he is. And it is kind of wild. You bring up the background. He does have a very high-level striking background, but he does like to fight in a lot of these kind of crazier car crash type brawls. So this is a very difficult fight to predict because either guy could easily get a stoppage win.
The thing that surprises me is, well, you train at a gym with a bunch of wrestlers, you're gonna be a good wrestler. If Nick Fiore was a good striker and training at New England Cartel, you'd see it in his fights, but he's a grappler. Slava Borshchev is a kickboxer that trains at Team Alpha Male. He's not a good wrestler because of it. He's getting better, or at least he's trying to, but in the UFC and Dana White's Contender Series, Matt, 4 fights total. His takedown defense for Slava Borshchev, 31%. 24 of 35 takedown attempts have landed on him. And guys just keep going to that well, because if you look at it for Borshchev, he really does struggle with trying to get back up to his feet. So every round starts back on the feet. It is what it is. The origin of his nickname being Slaviclaus. Uriah Faber and Cub Swanson like giving out nicknames, and he said, Uriah Faber gave me my nickname. I give off good vibes. Good vibes, bro. Peace, bro. Peace and love. And if you do look at it, for Maheshate, he got into MMA because the first MMA fight that he saw was Robbie Lawler versus Roy McDonald. Going to be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame coming up this year. Lord Nikon says it's hard not to pick a young, talented, developing fighter because you just assume they're rapidly improving. If they were, I'd pick Chase Hooper every single time. Maheshate in the matchup is the underdog. Slava Borshchev is the favorite. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise to us there to you. I'll say over under 65% Slaviclaus.
I think they'll be over.
No. 980 total votes. 58% Maheshate, 50% by decision, 40% by knockout for the 42% that have Borshchev, 39% by decision, 53% by the knockout. So Matt, when it does come down to this one, who do you have in the matchup?
Everything about what we've just said means that I should pick Maheshate, but I'm going to sag a little bit, go with Slava. I just think he's the more powerful striker 1-for-1, and if they do get into some of these more, 50-50 exchanges, I think it's going to favor Slava. Now, he could get knocked out in the opening 13 seconds of this fight, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. Let me get that out of the way, but he also has immense power, and I do think this fight is going to give him the opportunity to land some of those strikes.
I do have a hard time with this one. You can see it there on the screen. Maheshate, when he was a kid, his background was Greco-Roman wrestling. He won like a kind of a close to home meet in that, and he also had boxing in his back pocket. Boxing's the thing that definitely got him to the dance, and coming into the UFC, or even on to Dana White's Contender Series, level competition, combined opponent record, 26-36-2. So he wasn't really beating the socks off of very good fighters. But when you do look at this one, Matt, It is a really hard pick. I have Slava Borshchev, but a strong gust of wind could bring me either way in this matchup. It's not a very high-level fight at lightweight. Both guys coming off of losses for Borshchev. It is 2 in a row, so both of us going with Slava Borshchev in the fight. But again, let us know who you have down below in the comments section. This is definitely one that you want to see them square off on Friday, and we talk about it some more in Question Mark Kicks on Saturday. A big-time matchup. The next one on the card, also at lightweight, between a couple of guys who are seesawing in their career. You're not going to want to miss it. Diego's back. Carlos Diego Ferreira back in the UFC. He's been off for a time or two. He, like so many others on this card, on a lengthy losing streak is Diego Ferreira. And if you look at it, I mean, healing up from a lot of injuries. His last time out against Mateusz Gamrot, one of the weirder finishes you're going to see. That kick from behind or the knee from behind that hurt his rib. And then Jason Herzog says fight on. But Diego's done. And then Mateusz sinks up the choke. But for Carlos, the craziest part about it, kind of going into the losing streak, he was ranked all the way up at 10th in the lightweight division. He beats Anthony Pettis, and then he fights Beneil Dariush in the rematch. The first time they fought, Dariush won. The second time, Dariush won, but it was a bonus in that one. And then it was a bonus his next time out when he took on Gregor Gillespie, and then again, Gamrot. So all of those guys, I know Gillespie's been gone pretty well since then, but if you look at it, those guys in and around the rankings, and so has Diego Ferreira. And for Michael Johnson, not just in and around the rankings, he's been near the top of the mountain before in the rankings.
7-8 years ago.
That's it. I've never heard somebody be more negative about Michael Johnson in my entire life than you.
That's fine, because he's not the guy he used to be. There's no shame in saying that. That'd be like if I was sitting here saying Matt Brown's going to be the guy he once was when he was ranked at the top of the division. They have similar records. Like, for Michael Johnson, he just is what he is. There's no shame in that. It really is matchup dependent to see who Michael Johnson's going to win against, because he still has hand speed, he has good power, he has good boxing combinations, he has decent output. It's not going to wow you. It's not like one-of-one output. Same thing with his punching power. His punching power is not what it used to be by any means. This is a guy who knocked out Dustin Poirier in the main event of a show years ago. Now, he still has a lot of the technique. He just doesn't necessarily have the explosiveness behind a lot of that technique. This is weird, though, because for Michael Johnson, he is much more of a decision-type fighter at this stage of his career. He does have just more of
You keep the same narrative about Michael Johnson, and I don't even think you watch his
Michael
fights
Johnson
analytically.
is a steady fighter. He can fight in a steady manner from round 1 to round 15. Does Carlos Diego Ferreira fight like that? No, that's my whole point of this. I don't know why you'd cut in. Carlos in his last 2 matchups has gone for a lot of takedowns, a lot of wrestling, gotten tired as a result, and we have seen his power bar get diminished because of that. Michael Johnson's a good defensive grappler. I know he's been caught in some submissions, but for the most part, he can defensively wrestle. I don't think he's going to get taken down 1,000 times in this matchup. So for Johnson, I think he's the steadier guy. I do think this is a matchup where if he defends early takedowns, Diego is going to slow down. And even though he is a good striker on the feet, this is a guy who was talked about as like the boogeyman of the division. Him versus Gregor Gillespie was kind of like a boogeyman off, if you will. So for Diego, he was at the top. I just think his skill set at this point, like, Michael Johnson was kind of made to beat guys like Carlos Diego at this stage. Michael Johnson can defend a lot of takedowns, throw with a lot of volume. I just don't think we're going to go in there and see a Michael Johnson land one straight hand and end this fight.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, Johnson was able to hurt Jamie Mullarkey. A lot of people thought that he had
stopped a lot of times.
A lot of people thought that he beat Jamie Mullarkey. And if you look at it for Johnson, let's go off of 2 fights that he's gotten finished in the UFC by knockout. Or at least where he's gotten knocked down. He's only gotten knocked down twice. Johnson has 11 knockdowns in the UFC. He's been knocked down twice. One came against Danny Casillo, where Casillo lands a straight right hand, drops Michael Johnson. Casillo ends up on top for the whole first round. Second round, Michael Johnson does the same thing from the southpaw stance and lands a straight left and finishes Danny Casillo. And then Casillo goes, guess what? I'm getting revenge, but it's in Josh Emmett's corner. And Josh Emmett in the third round lands the overhand right that drops Michael Johnson. Danny Casillo probably through the roof happy about that. But when you look at it for Johnson, the takedowns that you had Mark Jacasey going for were in open space. Diego Ferreira doesn't go for open space takedowns. He strikes his way into distance where he's on the front foot and he lands boxing combinations. He backs you up. He goes single leg. If he can't get the single leg, then he tries to wrap his arms for a double leg. And then if he can't get it, most guys push him off and then they go back to striking. We saw it where Diego against, I wanted to say Muslim Salikov, but it's Mairbek Taisumov and Rustam Kabilov. He was able to take over as the fights went on and his output went up.
Years ago, though.
The scary thing about Diego Ferreira, though, out of his last 3 fights, although they're against really good competition, Diego's last fight was 518 days ago. His last win was UFC 246. That was McGregor versus Cerrone, and that was a fight of the night that he had. When I looked at the numbers, strikes landed per minute was down after those 3 fights by 0.4 per minute. His strikes absorbed per minute were up by 0.25. His takedown accuracy went down by 3%. And that was a lot because he got taken down multiple times in his last 2 fights. Over and over and over again. And he couldn't get the jiu-jitsu going. And I know Diego Ferreira owns his own gym, Team Ferreira BJJ. Victor Martinez, who's in the UFC, trains there. He also still does the drive from his hometown, or his adopted hometown, all the way to Fortis MMA to get the training. He said to James Lynch with MMA Sucker in an interview that he did recently that'll have Coach Saif Soda in his corner, but he'll also have Ramiz Brahimaj in that corner as well. When I look at this fight, Matt, I mean, if Michael Johnson can keep those hands a moving, keep them pumping, defending some of the takedowns and not having kind of some of the lapses that we've seen in grappling, I think Johnson can win this fight.
Why did you disagree with me so much when I said I think Johnson could be the steadier guy?
You always say the same things
But
about
no,
Michael
because
Johnson.
you don't listen to what I say, you just jump to conclusions. Michael Johnson is the steadier guy output-wise. I think he can hurt Diego at some points because Carlos isn't the most fundamental striker when he moves forward. When he's setting up, it's weird. At space in the Taisumov fight, he does have good output, but he's not a good striker when he's on the movement, be it forwards or backwards. It is kind of that middle of the cage type striking is where he excels, and I just think for Johnson, you're right, I might not be high on him at this stage of his career. I still think his skill set story is a good counter for Diego.
It is a tricky fight, though, all things told, because, again, Diego will throw a lot at you. He's the type of guy that's going to try and string together boxing combinations on the front foot. He'll land a snappy leg kick. I mean, if you look at it, Diego is favored in the matchup. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise us there to you. I'm going to say over under 60%. I think the fans are actually going with Diego Ferreira.
I think the fans love Michael Johnson.
The fans have Johnson, 1,005 total votes, 67% Johnson, 60% by decision for the 33% that have Ferreira, 47% by decision, 42% by submission. I'm a guy that picks Diego in a lot of fights. And if you only watched the last 3 fights, Diego has struggled near the tail end of them. But if you watch the entire win streak that he had to get into the lightweight rankings, he would continue to build as these fights went on. I know injuries are a big thing, but one of the things that he talked about in that James Lynch interview, he said, looking to box and he wants to take it to the ground for the submission. So dedicated to the game plan against a guy like Michael Johnson. We'll see how Johnson makes out. A staple at Killcliff FC, but both of us in this matchup going with Michael Johnson.
If I'm picking Michael Johnson, you know something's wrong in the world, but I've got Johnson in the matchup.
All right, well, let us know down below in the comments section who you have a possible fight of the night in the next matchup. It is Andrea Fialho taking on Joaquin Buckley at welterweight. Knockout wins, knockout losses. Andrea Fialho taking on Joaquin Buckley at 170 pounds. That's why you see the asterisks on the screen. So for Joaquin Buckley, I mean, he started off his pro career at welterweight, his amateur career at welterweight, his last time at 170 pounds. He weighed under the limit when he took on Logan Storley. He weighed 168.3, did Joaquin Buckley. And he was still big frame-wise for that matchup. Now, if you went back and watched that fight, I remember watching it live and thinking, man, this Logan Storley guy, he's good at wrestling, but he's not much fun to watch.
Well,
now, Storley's gotten better with his boxing, and Joaquin Buckley's gotten trickier with his wrestling, I guess. But in that matchup, it's 15 minutes of Logan Storley on top of Joaquin Buckley, and that's about it.
This fight, to me, though, there's like a cheat code if you want to figure out who won every basketball game every night. Don't look at any stats. Just look at who hit the most threes and who shot the most free throws. Whoever did that basically wins every single game. I can simplify this fight in those same terms. Whoever's moving forward is probably going to win this fight. Like, what do both guys struggle with? Both guys are offensive dynamos, I would say. When they are moving forward, they throw combinations. They can throw single shots with power. They both have exceptional hand speed, too, for how big they are. I would say Buckley, though, he is a bit more of an outlier. Like, you look at Joaquin Buckley, yes, he's a physical specimen, but, like, the guy throws hands, and he throws them very fast for being as big as he is. But if Fialho is moving backwards, we have seen him struggle, especially with his back up against the cage. He gets a little bit uncomfortable when he's being pressured by big punchers. And I know you're probably thinking, well, Jake Matthews, is he really a big puncher? But if you do look at that fight, and I do think that fight does give you a bit of a precursor to how Joaquin Buckley could fight, because Matthews might not be the power puncher Joaquin Buckley is, but a very upright boxer. He's going to throw a lot more boxing combinations, not show you as many kicks, although yes, Matthews will hit you with a leg kick quite a bit. I just think for Buckley, he can look at that fight and think, okay, if I move forward, make Fialho uncomfortable, I can land some strikes and I can land effective ones. But if you're Andre, you can look at a lot of Joaquin's past performances too and think, hey, when he's moving backwards, I can make him uncomfortable and I can land my own power shots.
I'm not a numbers guy when it comes to these fights, but this is the weird thing about Andrea Fialho when you look at just his UFC fights, and then I can tie it into the fights that he's had on the regional scene. Michel Pereira, 33%. Miguel Baeza, 57%. Cameron Van Camp, 70%. Then you have Matthews, 35%, and Salikov, 25%. What are those percentages? The significant strike percentage for Andrea Fialho, when he's losing, they're bad. So you go and you watch the fights and you try and figure out why. Because the fighters that he's losing to are able to figure out the distance and mix in their kicks, and Andrea Fialho can't do anything with his boxing combinations when space has been established by his opponent. Jake Matthews with leg kicks. You had Muslim Salikov at the start of the first round land a couple of kicks, landed that spin kick to the body that ended up finishing him in the second round. And after that, Andrea's one of these guys, like Darren Till. We have a couple of fighters that we liken him to where he kind of loads in and he gets that set. It's almost like a hitch in a baseball hitter's swing. You can't do it as much anymore.
He's not Gary Sheffield.
Andrea Fialho will do a hitch before he goes in to land his combinations. And Fialho's such an interesting puncher because he is so set in his ways. Joaquin Buckley can flow with his overall striking. Andrea Fialho, it's either double jab right hand, he'll land the jab and then throw that left hook, or he'll go jab right uppercut and land a leg kick. Andrea has these set combinations in the way that he likes to fight. He did it against Van Camp, and when it got ugly and he got hit by that straight shot and it kind of sent him into no man's land, he got back into it. Those were those car crashing type of exchanges. So when you do look at a matchup like this, Matt, again, Buckley, it's going to be the question marks of making the weight. Both of these guys, 6 bonuses between them, and they're, well, I mean, Fialho, it's short time in the UFC because it's just over a year. Buckley, it's been a little bit, but you look at the losses for Buckley. His last time out, like, he seemed upset to be fighting against Chris Curtis, and that caused him issues. He was upset when he fought Nasser Nimavov. That caused him issues. I don't know if he has any beef with Andrea Fialho. We're going to find out about that one. But when you do look at this one, Matt, I mean, a couple of strikers that don't have the greatest wrestling defense, I doubt it goes to the mat in this one.
I doubt it does. I could see Joaquin Buckley maybe throwing in a takedown. I'm not going to lie. Like, you got to say it if you think it could happen. Buckley's probably the more likely of the two because his striking style is kind of that peekaboo, go for an overhand, and it does give him positions to go for a lot of takedowns from that position. So, again, Buckley could implement that into his game, and that's why if he does look good on Friday at the scales, I do like Buckley in the matchup. I'll be interested to see how they do match him up moving forward at 170, but I love this as an introduction kind of fight for him at 170. Fialho is a very difficult opponent. If he lands his own shots, you're going to be in trouble, but he is kind of a jumpable hurdle, if you will.
You have 31 wins between these guys. 24 of them are by way of the knockout. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. In the matchup, surprised to us as they are to you, I'm going to say over under 67.5% Joaquin Buckley.
I think they'll be over.
They are over 1,001 total votes, 77% Buckley, 85% by knockout. For the 23% that have Fialho, 81% by the knockout. It is also a clash of stances. I mean, you have Joaquin Buckley southpaw, you have Andrea Fialho orthodox. Again, Fialho, I talked about where the numbers don't represent it. Go and watch Andrea Fialho's fight with XMMA when he's taking on James Vick. James Vick does have his back up against the cage, but his kicks keep Fialho at range, and he's not really able to do anything in the first round, but then once Fialho walks him down in the second round, he's able to get the finish. So if you look at a matchup like this, Matt, it is an oddball fight, and one where we picked both these guys to win. We picked them both to lose so far in their UFC tenure, but what is the pick in the matchup?
Buckley might not have some of the steady strikes from the outside to back up a guy like Fialho, like the leg kicks that you had brought up, but his presence and his footwork, I think, can do the same thing. Again, they might not show up as, like, strikes on the meter, but his guy uses his feet very well, and he does make you miss. Now, is he Floyd Mayweather? No, not at all. But he does have pretty good movement on the feet before he's able to land his own boxing combinations. So for that reason, and again, I feel like this pick more than any other is tied to question mark kicks because it's going to come down to how does Buckley look at 170. But like you brought up, he does seem to weigh in light for, well, he did weigh in light at 170. He'll weigh in light at 185 too. Like, I doubt we are going to get big issues. I'll look look dumb if we do. So I'll pick Buckley now, but I'll be curious to see how he looks in the scales.
I mean, Michael Irvin saying Murcielago MMA for Joaquin Buckley. Andrea Fialho out of one of the bigger gyms being kill clip, but you see him training with Ong Lang Sung, Ange Lusa. I mean, 185 middleweight zone, Michael Chandler. He wants to fight Conor McGregor there. I do have Joaquin Buckley on this one. I think he can circle away from some of these combinations out of Fialho, but once Fialho finds that range, you're in a lot of trouble. And Baeza was trying to do it at the start, and Fialho wasn't able to get it going. But then once he figured it out as the fight went on, he was really starting to land with a lot of power. So both of us in the matchup going with New Mansa, Joaquin Buckley, to get the win. The next fight on the card, Matt, we're talking about Emily Ducote taking on Lupe Godinez on short notice. A short notice catchweight on the fringes of strawweight. This fight at 120 pounds between Emily Ducote taking on Lupita Godinez. When you look at the matchup, Matt, I mean, this one was just announced on May 6th, so 2 weeks notice for Godinez. We saw Godinez take short notice fights in the past. She lost to Angela Hill at a catchweight. She lost at flyweight on what? She had fought the week before, won at strawweight, and then fought the next week against one Luana Karolina. Won the first round, lost after that. So Lupita Godinez taking another short notice fight, representing Titan Athletics in BC, but she also trains at the Sound in Squamish with Jamie Lynn Horth, UFC winner of a fight. So I'm sure if Godinez wins, she's going to want a short notice call at UFC 289. Everybody does down there in Vancouver. But when you look at this fight, Matt, I mean, it's the nickname that her coach gave her because of too many donuts. Little fat girl. It's Emily Ducote with Gordina. You look at it for both these women. I mean, champions from different organizations before they came into the UFC. LFA and BTC for Godinez. Invicta for Ducote. And you saw Ducote go, 4-4 with Bellator. She had fought for the title against Ilima-Lei McFarlane. Takedowns were the issue for Ducote at certain points, and then pressure fighters could kind of get off on their striking. But you saw Ducote take a giant step forward with Invicta.
Exactly.
She had that crazy head kick knockout over Danielle Taylor. She comes into the UFC against a former Danielle Taylor opponent in Jessica Penne, backed her up, defended all the takedowns, landed a lot of strikes. Then against Angela Hill, which is the free fight for this week, which is wild, Emily Ducote versus Angela Hill. In that one, Hill backs her up, lands to the head and to the body, and Ducote on the back foot landed no volume like we'd seen.
It will be interesting to see, though, if Godinez can have a similar gameplay to someone like Angela Hill by backing up Ducote, because Ducote isn't a thunderous puncher by any means, but she lands good shots.
Yeah.
And they're damaging shots, too. She has good elbows up close, and that's what I think with both these fighters. They're both well-rounded, but they go about it in very, very different ways. Like, for Ducote, a lot of her work is going to get done on the feet in her striking, but the one thing that has grown a lot for her, you bring up how takedown defense was a big liability for her. Her offensive takedowns aren't terrible when she does go for them. Now, I don't love her in some extended grappling situations on the mat. She'll put her arms in bad positions, kind of get caught in some close arm bars. And against someone like Godinez, who's kind of as squirrely as she is on the mat, it's not really the position you want to be in. But again, Ducote's game has grown tremendously since we saw her on the Bellator scene, and it does have to be given its due right for that. But for Godinez, I wonder what she's going to do to get this fight to the mat, because
If she does.
What?
I don't think Godinez takes to the mat in this one.
No, but I think she's going to use the clinch to at least threaten with the takedown. Ducote's someone who, kind of like Karolina, she likes throwing the elbows. She's just very active from that position. So from that position, I could see Emily winning in that spot. So for Godinez, I think she will have to mix her martial arts. That's why I do bring that up. I think the takedown attempt is much more likely from her. And again, from that clinch position, I just think it's something she can do to disrupt the timing of Ducote, because Ducote is steady for 15 minutes. She's going to be there if she can be in your face. But again, like you bring up with the Hill fight, that's a pretty big Achilles heel to have in your game.
If either of these women are on the front foot, they're very good. If they're on the back foot, they struggle tremendously. Godinez against Hill, she talked about it in an interview before her last fight against Cynthia Calvillo with James Lynch, to where she had a bit of a hip issue. She couldn't kind of push off for some of those takedowns. Not getting the takedowns against Hill cost her in the striking. Her last time out against Cynthia Calvillo, the mat was lava. She didn't really go for the same amount of takedowns. And even when Calvillo got the takedown, Godinez was able to pop back up and start to strike. Eric Colon thought it was 29-28 for Calvillo in the matchup. Most others thought it was either 29-28 or even 30-27 for Godinez, because the power strikes were there to the volume. So when you look at a matchup like this, whoever's able to push forward should be able to win. I'd stay away from it. It's pot and popcorn for me. It is on short notice. Godinez, when she fought against Hill, had a catch weight of 120. That was in California, so you get the rehydration numbers. She rehydrated to 130, so she only gained 10 pounds. She's not cutting
Well, okay, but at that weight, that's a good amount of weight, though.
But she isn't cutting like some wicked amount of weight. She's not like...
But nobody at strawweight cuts 20 pounds. Like, that's 20% of their body weight. That's my whole point. Like, 10 pounds for how big they are is still a good amount.
Devison Figueiredo caught a
Devison Figueiredo's a guy. There's a
125.
big difference between the two, and you know that. Let's not act like it's the same.
Regardless, when you do look at this matchup, Matt, again, it is on short notice. Dakota was getting ready for Poliana Viana. We even had the graphics all done up for it. You look at the odds in this one. Godinez is a slight favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprised that's there to you. Fans that watch that Hill-Dakota fight are probably really down on Dakota. I'm going to say over-under 72.5% Godinez.
I'll say under, but she'll be the favorite.
Yeah, it's a popularity contest. 791 total votes, 79% Godinez, 92% by decision. For the 21% that have Dakota, 88% by decision. Jumping jeepers. When I look at this matchup, Matt, Emily Dakota throws more set boxing combinations and more leg kicks than Lupita Godinez traditionally. Godinez will more than likely go in there, box, land like a single leg kick, reset, and then try and land some steadier boxing shots. But when you look at it for Godinez, why do we know that she's tough? She gets hit a lot in her fights, and she gets hit when she's moving forward. So this is a really tough one to try and actually offer a prediction, although most fans will pick Godinez in the matchup.
I'll go with the slight underdog in Dakota. I like her steadiness, and again, that last fight was an awful performance from her. Like, you're kind of buying at the lowest point with Emily Dakota right now, but if you do look at the whole portion of her game, and I agree with you, whoever's moving forward in this is probably also going to be winning, because both fighters do have some of those defensive struggles where they're not really throwing on the back foot, they don't necessarily know where to put their heads, so I'll go with Emily ever so slightly.
You know what's gross when you go back and look? Emily Dakota, when she fought Angela Hill, was ranked 13th. Hill was ranked 12th. Emily Dakota was a minus 125 favorite. Modest. I'm quite sure I picked Emily Dakota to win in that fight. Lupita Godinez fought Angela Hill. Minus 360 favorite. She lost that one. Now, I know injuries are what they are, but when I look at a matchup like this, I think Godinez can pressure the fight, can keep a pace for 3 rounds, and just keep Dakota on the back foot. But again, I think we've laid out a pretty darn good game plan.
It's a very close fight.
Both of these fighters. Matt, we're split on the pick. You're going with Emily Dakota. I'm going with the Mexican-Canadian out of BC, Lupita Godinez. Next fight's a co-main event. Edmund Shahbazyan taking on Anthony Hernandez. It's fluffy. You're not going to want to miss it. Edmund was on a 3-fight losing streak, going into his last fight against Dalcha champion, but like I Love McConan in 2014, got the club going up, and he was able to go out there, thwart the takedown attempts at open space by Dalcha, keep it in boxing distance, and drop Dalcha with a combination of knees and punches, and then he really did have a pretty highlight reel finish to that win over Dalcha Linjambula. A big kind of get-right fight for Edmund. And if you look at it, I mean, he was very highly ranked going into the fight against Derek Brunson. That was a 3-round main event. He was very heavily favored in that fight. Ultimately, the takedowns, they were his Achilles heel there. And when you look at it in a matchup like this, Matt, Edmund's takedown defense has cost him in other fights. Nasrin Imavov, Jack Hermanson. It's cost him in fights. But his striking has always been good, and the move to Extreme Couture's last time out really helped him out. Now, it was one of those trap cards because that was Dalcha's old gym, and then he moved on. Shahbazyan goes there, and he gets to kind of piggyback off the knowledge of the coaches. But when I look at a fight like this, Matt, Anthony Hernandez has been so good in these finishes that he has. But when I went back and watched the tape, my good grief, he leaves himself out there to get hit in every single fight, and he does.
He certainly does.
He does.
He has a great chin, though.
No, he doesn't.
He has pretty good chin, I'd say. He's been clipped in basically every fight he's ever been in, and he's won the majority of them. Like, he gets hit a lot. That's my whole point. You're getting so aggressive at points, Craig. Just
bare knuckles own Maluco Perez.
I know, but you're too hot-headed. It's all good. For Edmund Shahbazyan, I don't think we learned a lot in the Dalcha performance. That's all I'm saying. Because he lost to great fighters, and that's what we thought Edmund was for a very long time in his career. I thought that that's what he was, before, I guess, going into the Derek Brunson fight. Because you don't beat Brad Tavares by first-round knockout, and that's kind of a fluke, right? Because Brad Tavares, might not win every single one of his fights, right? Like, he's pretty basic. You know what he's good at. You know what he's not good at. But you rarely starch him and then don't go on to do great things. Look at guys like Yoel Romero. Look at, well, Robert Whittaker was able to do it with that beautiful left hook. So normally when you beat Brad Tavares, great things happen to you in your career. But Edmen Shahbazyan, he's one of these guys who, when you have all these first round knockouts, it's great to talk about, right? Like, hey, they're so picture perfect. The technique's great. But it also leaves a lot of question marks as to what happens after minute 5. What happens 6 through 15. And then 6 through 25 when you reach the point of the division that Edmen had reached. And we have seen that he can start to slow down at those points. Now, you bring it up. Anthony Hernandez has been hurt, has been clipped in many of his fights. And if Edmen does go in there with the confidence that he had in the Brad Tavares fight, where he's peppering the jab out there, getting Anthony Hernandez uncomfortable on the back foot, I could definitely see Edmen going in there and getting one of those kind of picture-perfect TKO wins. But the flip side is, when Anthony Hernandez is able to kind of settle his way into the fight, get it ugly, because his striking, I think, has improved quite a bit throughout his UFC tenure. We all know how good he is on the mat. The crazy Rodolfo Vieira win he was able to get. So this is a really fun fight, because again, I could see Edmen going in there kind of starching Anthony Hernandez and getting back, maybe not all of the hype that he once had, but at least getting back into a position to where he can fight for a spot in the rankings. And if Anthony Hernandez beats Edmen Shahbazyan, you're beating a guy who was ranked in the top 10 at one point.
Edmen Shahbazyan, I know he was kind of that like big time prospect. He was the Ronda Rousey, had that seal of approval, trained under Edmond Tarverdyan. You watch Edmen Shahbazyan strike, and he kind of strikes like Anthony Hernandez's main training partner, Max Griffin. It's a lot of moving that upper body. He's throwing a lot of odd angle punches, low base on him. If you look at Shahbazyan, though, struggling with some of those takedowns, Anthony Hernandez, now, as he's progressed in the UFC and as he's beaten Fremd and Barrio, you see him come out with his hands really high and almost like a tie stance. I actually had it in my notes. I know it's a net negative because of the way that people are going to look at him after his fight last weekend in Anthony Smith. But he comes up with that knee up. He holds his hands up and he moves his head a lot. But his head's always there because his body doesn't move. His head's just there moving. And then he closes the distance really fast. And then he tries to get the takedown. He'll go single leg, double leg, single leg. He tries to chain it. If you make a mistake and go for your own takedown, well, that's your problem, buddy. But when you look at this fight, Matt, I mean, Anthony Hernandez overall, I think he has gotten better, but I saw him get clipped by Barrio. I saw him get clipped by Kevin Holland, who was able to keep his arms out there, land those big shots. And then when Hernandez rushed in for the takedown, he got met by the knee. Shahbazyan was able to land the big knees against Dalcho and Jambula. And I know there's a no contest on Hernandez's record. That's the win that he had over Jordan Reid on Contender Series, where he tested positive for the weed. But if you look at it for Hernandez, he loses to Maluko Perez in his UFC debut, where first round, Perez out-wrestles him. Second round, Perez out-wrestles him and submits him. And then that other loss to Holland, other than that, pretty well a clean sheet. He's able to take down Jun Young Park, who's very well-rounded and a good boxer.
Would you say, though, it is a little bit similar to last weekend's main event that we had looked at between Jailton Almeida and Jairzinho with this respect? Jailton, we know how good his grappling is, right? When he gets on top, he can make a lot happen. We were wondering, okay, can he get past the initial takedown defense of Jairzinho? I do think if Hernandez gets on top of Edmen, he is going to have a lot of success. It'll look a lot like the Hermanson fight, I think. I think we will see some of that activity in a lot of favorable positions from Hernandez, just because I don't think Shahbazyan's going to be able to have that kind of work rate to get out for some of those positions underneath.
I'm not completely sold on Edmen Shahbazyan if you haven't kind of gauged it already. I mean, Hernandez is a giant favorite in the matchup. If you do look at the Topology votes, Matt, surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 85% Hernandez.
I think it'll be under 85.
It's going to be under. It's under 1,044 total votes. 70% Hernandez, 68% by submission for the 30% that have Shahbazyan, 53% by knockout. And when I do look at this matchup, Matt, I mean, for Hernandez, stringing together takedowns against Barrio and against Josh Fremd, those two guys have wrestling in their back pockets. If you're able to do that, that is definitely very telling. I do have a hard time seeing him getting them. He could definitely get them. It's just, this is the fight.
Dog get him in the Barrio fight.
This is the fight that I have the hardest job trying to offer a prediction on the entire card.
If it's under 6 minutes, I have Edmen. If it goes past 6 minutes, I have Hernandez. Anthony Hernandez on top of you is not a position you want to be in. He can threaten with submissions. He does have good ground and pound, and he's a big guy. I know he's not really for the weight class, but he makes you feel his presence when he's in that spot. And we've seen Edmen really struggle.
You got to explain this to everybody, and to me as well. You've talked about it with Anthony Hernandez. You said the same thing about Joaquin Buckley. What is feeling somebody's presence?
What do you mean? Okay, so feeling somebody's presence is really easy
Is it
to
like
say.
when you walk into a room,
no,
there's
I
a
can
cold
no, I can
spot?
describe it easily.
You know there's a
Joaquin
ghost?
Buckley is a big guy, right? He can back you up without throwing punches. He can feint punches, and you are going to back up because you feel his presence. I don't think this is a weird thing, by the way. I think a lot of people are going to agree and know exactly what I'm talking about. With Anthony Hernandez, he's a heavy guy in the top position, like a lead blanket, if you will, like Tim Kennedy. That's all I'm saying. I think he's going to win a lot of those positions in the top, but that's the thing. I think Edmund's going to be able to tee off on him for like a 3.5 minute portion in this fight. What happens after that 3.5 minute round is going to be really interesting, but I am going to pick Anthony Hernandez in the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Hernandez with those big blitzes like he had against Perez, like he had against Holland, like he had against Barrio, he got clipped in all of them. That's why I don't have a ton of confidence in picking Anthony Hernandez. I think he's going to have success with the takedowns. I mean, we saw Shahbazyan, though, in the fight against Imavov. It was Shahbazyan that shot for the takedown that ended up getting him finished, but it was because Imavov had the kickboxing to then get into that range to then force that takedown. So
he also shot, 38 takedown attempts on Darren Stewart in his debut?
Hernandez doesn't necessarily have that in his striking repertoire. That's why I don't love the pick with Anthony Hernandez. I will go with Hernandez, though. But it is a really, really tricky one, and that takes us into the main event of the evening, a fight that was shuffled from a week ago. Mackenzie Dern taking on Angela Hill. And it's a clash of styles. In the main event coming up this weekend, Mackenzie Dern taking on Angela Hill. These women are a combined 0-3 in UFC main events. This is the best that they could do at the UFC's Apex with no fans. And guess what? The next card after this, it's another Apex show. And then it's a pay-per-view. And then it's another Apex show. The UFC, it's going downhill. But when it comes down to this matchup, Matt, Angela Hill ranked 14th in the division. Mackenzie Dern is ranked 8th. And when you look at this overall, I say it's a clash of styles. Angela Hill, a Muay Thai trained striker. And you see that in her fights. You saw that against Emily Ducote. Mackenzie Dern, to the nth degree of the jiu-jitsu. Dern, the 5-round experience against one Marina Rodriguez. Round 2, she gets it down to the mat, threatens with the submissions, but she's not able to get it done. Against Yan Xiaonan, round 2, round 5, a lot of success. I mean, almost a 10-8 in the round 5 that was against Yan Xiaonan. But if you look at it in this matchup, Matt, again, it is a lot of oil versus water. Brandor likes the BKFC. It's a different sport. That's why I don't think it's going to take over. BKFC would take over if they would do cards that were Luke Rockhold, Mike Perry, and then the weekend after, guys you've never heard of. And then after that, this weekend, Houston Alexander's fighting in a main event.
For someone who claims to not care about it, you definitely follow it more than you let on.
Because they send me the press emails.
You
Houston
don't have to
Alexander. When you look at this fight, Matt, I mean, both of these women were supposed to be a 3-round fight on the main card last weekend, and now they get a 5-round main event. Angela Hill had a fight of the night in the main event against Michelle Waterson-Gomez. She's definitely fared better in 5-round atmospheres. And why do I say that? I know they're combined 0-3 in UFC main events, but only one of these women has 5-round experience outside of the UFC, and that's Angela Hill from her time as the Invicta champ. She had those 3 early fights in the UFC that didn't go well, and then she won 4 in a row and won that Invicta belt, came back in, and I know it's 15-12. I know that's the record. There's been a lot of close split decisions on that record. But if you look at it for Angela Hill, think of her fight against Amanda Lemos if you've ever wanted to see a comeback kid type of performance, losing the first round, winning round 2 and round 3. You look at this fight though, Matt. I know we offered up a pick last week, but let's try and break it down for 5 rounds.
I look at Angela Hill this way in the division. If you're in the top 10, you'll probably beat her by unanimous decision. I'm not saying it's a blanket statement, but just for the most part, if you're in the top 10, you can beat her. If you're ranked 10-17, you're probably getting a split decision. It's going to be a close fight where you're both throwing a lot of volume. Both fighters are having their moments. And if you're further back than top 17, she's going to mop you and probably win a unanimous decision. Those are the many shades of Angela Hill. And that's how a lot of her fights go. But you can't really break down this fight in those terms. You want to know why? Mackenzie Dern is probably the 35th best striker in the UFC's strawweight division. She might be the best grappler, though. Like, the discrepancy between her skill set is just so much to where Angela Hill's going to have success on a lot of the in-betweens, because she does have great volume. Again, she's going to have the lasting ability. It just comes down to, can she defend every takedown attempt? And that's not even hyperbole, really. It's just every takedown attempt. That's how lethal someone like Dern is on the mat. And yes, she's not like a Damian Maia, for instance, or maybe a Fabricio Verdum. You don't worry about her to that degree, because she might lack some of the physicality. But I think it's fair to say Mackenzie Dern is going to win most, if not all, positions on the mat. So for Hill, it comes down to the takedown defense. And you're going to bring it up, I'm assuming.
11% takedown accuracy for Dern, averages 0.61 takedowns per 15 minutes.
There are some jiu-jitsu fighters that we talk about. Think about Gilbert Burns, for instance. Like, Gilbert Burns and Jacare, I think, are two of the better wrestlers who kind of have BJJ as their base, right? Big, strong guys.
Vieira has good wrestling, too.
Well, I'm just talking about guys who have reached the top levels of their divisions, respectively. Mackenzie Dern doesn't have any of that. She does go for a lot of pulling guard, a lot of that kind of Chrome Gracie style. And to her credit, I do think that her type of striking does help her at least close the distance for a lot of those takedown attempts. I'm not saying the attempts look pretty after it, but her striking does help set it up. So I'm a lot happier that she went to kind of a boxing approach and less of like a karate one that would get her even further away from her opponent. It's going to be an interesting fight because, again, if Hill can just keep it on the feet, she has a great chance to win.
And we talked about this, last weekend leading up. Angela Hill trains out of a great gym to get you ready for Mackenzie Dern. And we talked about at the start of the card, Takashi Sato is taking on Themba Gorimbo. They both train out of Southern Florida. Both these women out of Southern California. Dern out of Ruka Sport and Alliance Jiu-Jitsu out of San Diego for Angela Hill. With Jessica Penne, with Jenna Bishop, that's now over with Bellator, an IBJJF Open champ. And she's really somebody that's going to get you ready for the wrestling, the physicality, and the jiu-jitsu that you're going to see out of Mackenzie Dern. Now, Dern's gotten better with the striking. You saw her get really aggressive against Yan Xiaonan in that last main event. So when it does come down to this one, we'll see how the cardio plays out for both women. To me, I think Dern's going to come out hot in the first round, like she did against Yan Xiaonan, and really try and press the action. And Hill, lasting approach in some of these fights. I don't necessarily worry about the cardio, even though Angela Hill's the much older fighter in this matchup. I don't worry about it as much in a matchup like this. So there are a lot of things to look forward to. I mean, for Angela Hill, she got submitted by Randa Marcos. She got submitted by Rose Namajunas, who's now competing at Jiu-Jitsu tournament. Like ADCC was Rose Namajunas just recently. But when you do look at a matchup like this, obviously the 5 rounds to 3 rounds, it changes a lot. What do you make of that one right there?
I still have Mackenzie Dern in the matchup. Again, I just think it comes down to positions more than the rounds. Again, Angela Hill could win every round. It's kind of like what we said about Jairzinho last week. Jairzinho can win at the UFC level, right? We all agree. He has done it many times. He hasn't won a lot of rounds at the UFC level. And for Dern, she has cut from a similar cloth. Not the punching power one, of course, but does she go out there and dominate a lot of rounds? No, unless she's able to get the takedown, of course, and ride out a lot of it with her top control. I still think Dern, with her submission ability, though, is enough of a threat for her to get the win in this one.
I mean, it is a tricky fight for all the reasons that we did state. If we go over and we look, we threw it out there to you in the YouTube community tab. You guys do a great job of kind of hitting that poll right there. So far, 71% going with Mackenzie Dern. I know she is a pretty darn big favorite in the matchup as well. If we have a look over here in the YouTube chat, because we're doing this show live. Screw it, we're doing it live on a Monday night. 70%, so it is very close going with Dern. Dawson, love the content, boys. Your guys' analysis helped me win a $700 on a $10 bet, and you definitely hit up that super chat. That is much appreciated. When it does come down to this one, Matt, I'll go with Mackenzie Dern in the 5 rounds instead of Angela Hill in the matchup. I think at some point over the 5, she's going to be able to get it down to the mat and threaten with some of that jiu-jitsu. But again, I picked Angela Hill in a 3-round fight. Why? Because she can pepper so much more activity out there on the feet than Mackenzie Dern can. It's not even funny. And career-wise, 77% takedown defense for Angela Hill so far in the UFC. These are the only 2 ranked fighters on the card. There's 12 fights total. It's quantity over quality with the UFC at this point in 2023, and that's what you're going to get from them. So, hey, a live show previewing and profiling all of the actions coming up this weekend. Matt, we have question mark kicks. What is that on Saturday?
It's 2 hours before the start of the first prelim. Gives us a chance to, hey, watch the weigh-ins, listen to some of the storylines throughout the weeks. There's normally a rib injury. Wink, wink to the chat there on that one. So, yeah, it just gives us a chance to go back through the breakdowns. Sometimes fights get canceled, too.
You got to explain. And there's a guy named Andrew Bonifaz that'll come into our chat.
Just an inside joke, Craig. You can just leave it at that.
Winners and losers and say there's a rib injury.
He doesn't know what an inside joke is. So that's all it is. It just gives us a chance to go back through the fights again. Sometimes fights get canceled. It gives us more things to talk about. And yeah, just kind of a one last opportunity to go back through the card. It's always a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun on Saturdays. It is Dern versus Hill. Then it's a week break. And then you get set for UFC Fight Night. Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi. A lot of fight action coming at you. Some boxing this weekend as well, but you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night picks. As we always say, let's get into it.